Thanks. I really enjoyed your presentation. I was wondering if you could reflect, Steve Bradbury from Iowa State.
Good.
If you could reflect a little bit on Marinowski and Carlson's paper of 1986 and economic consequences for resistance management, and from the individual grower to groups of growers, co-ops, industry, and federal or state regulatory. And then also if you could intertwine that with Roger's diffusion of innovation and the common pooled resource, and especially in the context of the diffusion of preventative innovation, and how you see all those threads combining into some of the ideas you've got on the community-based approach.
Great question. So I wish I had a couple of grad students to go to work on this. Because I think that's well, first, most of you may or may not know about the paper we referred to. John Marinowski and Jerry Carlson wrote a very influential paper. Actually, it was part of the National Academy proceedings back in the mid-'80s on this question about mobility and what mobility had to do. George, I'll invite you to also add to this if I get it wrong. But basically, they concluded that insect mobility was a serious problem, but that there wasn't much evidence of weed mobility. And that when there was, and if there is insect mobility, then what they say is the companies have a decided incentive to try and manage that. And that therefore these community-based approaches would be necessary because you do have this common pool resource, and that there would be incentives, and industry would actually help and try and form these incentives. Hang on just a second. And so that was a very important paper. I mean, what George and I have talked, and I talked to John when I was out in Iowa State earlier this spring about that paper. It was a very important paper, and we have been, we kind of humorously encouraged him to think about that paper reconsidered now, because there's new evidence that suggests that there is indeed mobility in weeds. And Fred Gould, by the way, also wrote a paper in the early 90s suggesting it wasn't a problem in weeds. And now I suspect that Fred would probably have a different view about this. So I think that's really important. There's a whole bunch of implications that flow from whether mobility exists and what the companies would do and what the community would do. But it's an excellent paper and great to read for the state of knowledge at that time. And he talked about, the incentives that industry had to maintain a technology, and if they had a monopoly, they had more incentive to maintain it, just as George talked about, because that's their intellectual property. They want to manage it in a way that ensures a long life for it, and what have you. Now I've forgotten the second. What was the second question? Oh, Ev Rogers. Okay, and Ray talked a little bit about this, the diffusion of innovations model. And that bell-shaped curve, we have the early, you guys have probably all seen this. You have the early adopters, and then the middle adopters, and the late adopters, and it seems like there's some that never adopt, and whatever. But anyway, there's this curve that starts out kind of flat, then increases at an increasing rate. The second, as we say, the second derivative is positive, and it goes up and it keeps going, and then it tails off after more and more of the people don't. And that's a general phenomenon that's been very valuable in studying the diffusion of innovations in agriculture. And for whatever reason, that the innovations associated with herbicide resistance management have not followed that. That would be my conclusions, just on the surface of the information. So the question is, why is that? Is it economics? Is it a lack of education? Is it because these people don't believe? I mean, you gave your responses earlier. The benefits are too uncertain, what have you. We need more research on that. I don't know. I don't know do you know of a good study that's been done on that?
I know, he talks about how preventative innovation takes a long time. It's the hardest.
Yeah.
Some examples, like with HIV, approaches for minimizing spread of HIV or family planning as examples. But again, it's how I think you find those communities that where you can start to get it going, because there's the aspect of observability, trialability, and maybe there's some incentives that help some nodes demonstrate how it can go, and then that can diffuse out. But sort of how do you create the call to action?
Great. That's, I tell you.
I think patience is important.
Yeah. So if there's any graduate students on the call-in out there, you get a great topic of research in sociology. Yes, next
So
question.
the mobility issue, I think, is clear that we're looking at a paper that's 20 years out of date, because in the 80s we really didn't have the levels of resistance and numbers of species. If you go back and look at those curves that have been presented, so the answer basically is your answer. It depends, both with insects, fungi, and with weeds. The mobility is proportional to the propagation of the pest. It's inherent in cases of plants. It's either pollination biology or seed spread, seed dispersal. So all these things, I mean, this paper could be written right now. I mean, a graduate student could, well, maybe not a graduate student, but a graduate student with a good PI could revise this whole thing right now. And there's basically levels of mobility in every one of those classes of organisms. And it's now known because resistance is such a bigger and better documented phenomenon.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. Actually, and I take my cues from Harold. He's one that tells me about mobility and said, yeah, that's part of the...
10 minutes.
10 minutes. I have 10 minutes. More questions. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ski Jones from EPA. I'm wondering if there's a threshold of severity that has to be reached before community-based approaches become more acceptable. And Steve mentioned HIV. There's some obvious bigger ones, you know, like world wars and things like that. I'm just wondering if you know if we're getting to that point on this issue where there may be more likelihood that these community-based approaches would be adopted.
Excellent question. Excellent. And the example we took out in the interest of time was boll weevil eradication. And the research on that shows that just exactly what you said. It does depend upon the severity of the problem has to occur to give people really the incentives to try and engage, because this is costly behavior. This is not costless. They're going to have to come together, and I don't know, you know how much farmers enjoy going to meetings and talking to their neighbors. You know, they're going to have to get together and debate and deliberate about how they approach these things. So I think there's definitely, I don't know where we are on that, and right now, and I use my two favorite words, it depends. It depends on the crop, it depends on the region, and probably where we are on that threshold of going into when these community-based approaches are viable and can in fact lead to improvements, then I have a feeling it depends. I'd be interested in any comments from the audience. Most of you are much closer to this than I am. Jason, I'm looking at you. Do you want to add anything to what we said?
Jason Norsworthy, University of Arkansas. So you've commented about the zero tolerance program, and again, I guess a little comments around that. First of all, you've got to have someone that really has to champion the effort. For us at the time, that was Ken Smith. Ken's actually with us here now. Ken is right here in the red shirt.
Great. Stand up, Ken. Great.
Ken was really the one that got behind zero tolerance. So we actually had the data in terms of the dispersal. We had the data on the biology. We felt like, with that being said, again, we got with Ken and again initiated the zero tolerance. But it's all around organization. It's bringing groups together. I hate to say this, but I will say it. The zero tolerance program probably has not been as successful for us probably for the last year and a half, because Ken has since retired. And but with that being said, again, we do have a county agent in that county where we are practicing zero tolerance. I spoke to him a few weeks ago now. We still are utilizing that concept, but again, you really have to have someone behind it that's going to champion it. And I will say that's one of the cleaner areas within our state as a result of the communities coming together and understanding the consequences of resistance.
Great. That's an excellent, that should be another design principle, is find a champion. You know, find somebody who has the credibility and the knowledge to bring people together. And you have to be, I don't know if you believe it, but you also have to be a good listener probably as well in doing that. Excellent question. Thank you, Jason. Put you on the spot. Any other questions before lunch? Are you hungry?
We've got 5 or 6 minutes, time for a couple more.
Anybody want?
Seems to me, Dave, that a good time to look at a community effort might be before this threshold of, oh my God, is reached. We know enough about resistance problems all over the country that we certainly can convince people that, yeah, you're going to get it. So when's the proper time to start a community effort? Is it after you're under tons of Palmer amaranth, or is it when you found the first field in Iowa?
That's a great point. And yeah, because once it spreads so much, the problem's going to be much more difficult. But generally, I think my experience would be, having been a farmer and advised farmers and worked with them, is that they don't often move before they see the problem in their fields. Even though, and I know Mike Owens told me that many of these farmers have it in their field and they don't realize it already. And if they knew it, maybe they'd be more inclined to get involved in a community-based approach. So I think that's an excellent point. We know, I mean, everybody tells me Palmer in Iowa is a big problem, right? How many? There's several people here from Iowa. And that might be a candidate case where we could get off early to see if we could do something to avoid getting steeply up that curve and then the consequences that flow from that. We finally got Mike to stand up. Go ahead.
Yes, you mentioned the Palmer amaranth discoveries in Iowa, and it's been really interesting and dare I say extremely disappointing, because my colleague Dr. Harsler went out and did all the scouting and has found a number of different locations, and actually we had one grower in the southeastern part that has done a wonderful job. Bob recently went back, and this is on our website, this report, went back to southwest Iowa and looked at all of the locations that he had discovered and identified and spoke with the growers and so forth about this, went back to see what influence he has had, and the concerns about Palmer, which I think we can agree have tipped the iceberg to really talk about herbicide-resistant weeds and management. What he found, as reported in this little website, nada. They have done nothing. And in fact, one of them is in a showcase plot of a company, and they didn't even go in and weed out the Palmer amaranth, trying to keep the flow. And so good news is that apparently whoever replaces me in the none too distant future has got pretty good job security.
But you know, that raises the point, and this goes back to what Ray was talking about, is can we understand, I mean, why can't we get people, as Harold suggests, they know it's coming, but they do discount problems because they have discount rates, they have financial needs presently, and they say, oh, I'll deal with that in the future. But the future actions are more costly often and less effective than doing that. So how do you get this proactive approach? So I think the field's wide open. I don't have any miracle suggestions how to do this, but we do know that it should happen sooner because there's some good economics behind that. Les?
Yes, we have a question that's come in on the webcast from Susan Kohler. If it is too late to take action, so the pessimistic profile that was talked about earlier, it might be too late. What can be done in those cases? The growers will need the help of others, but it will take much longer to get results than if we start earlier to address the problem. So what do we do?
What do we do when it's too late?
Well, we hope it's not too late.
Or we're way down the curve about this. I don't know, are there any growers here? I mean, the people who are growing cotton in Georgia, I mean, they got into some serious issues that have these organizations. I don't know what Jason just talked about. I mean, with zero tolerance, there was a champion that took this on and saw the problem and tried to avoid it. So I don't have an answer. I don't have a good answer for that question. But I think we have to figure out, and this involves, you know, this is kind of this morning I would call it the onslaught of the social scientists at you, but we need good social science research to figure out why people don't take more preemptive action, proactive, and what we could do to make this easier to form community-based approaches. There's good, I mean, this has been done in water, It's been done in a lot of different cases, in fisheries too. I mean, fisheries is the classic common pool resource, where a fisherman's actions will affect his other fishermen's actions. And so we have good research that suggests why people, but unfortunately people are often, they're economists, what do they call them, hominists? They're economists, basically, and they'll say, oh, I can wait on that because I've got other things that are more pressing. And unfortunately, I'm sorry, Susan, I don't have a better answer for that.
I don't either, but maybe we could send Ray around the country to tell people it's time. It's pretty effective.
There you go.
David, thank you.
All right.
Okay, the time has come for lunch. It's back out in the Great Hall here. Please try to be back in your seats at about 1:27.
I should have got you up there.
Thank you.
So, comment.